Long years ago, we made a trip with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge.
8 नवंबर 2016 की रात्रि को 12 बजे से
चीफ मिनिस्टर के लिए मेरा एक ही संदेश है कि वो राजधर्म का पालन करें।
हार्डवेयर वालों की सोच क्या होती है, हार्ड वर्क वालों की सोच क्या होती है।
अरे ये ना पंजाब की खुशबू।
I often read or hear from well-meaning friends and colleagues, the sort who, much like the listeners of my soliloquies, think in English, work in offices with AC and a stacked snack bar, and shrink from sweat, about this menace of the Kanwar Yatra. And as someone shaped by the privilege of book-lined rooms and filtered air, my first impulse is to nod in quiet agreement, to share in the sigh of disapproval, to feel an intellectual kinship with those who see the barefoot marchers as a civic blight. Especially when I see how, on a monsoon July afternoon, somewhere between the slow hiss of the tar melting with the first rains on the highway and the thrum of trance music strapped to a covered truck, a barefoot teenager, his chest painted with Shiva's trident and his mouth stained red from gutka, waves a saffron flag at a car refusing to give way. Behind him, a procession of thousands wrapped in fluorescent orange and ecstasy march as though they own the road. For this 1 week, they do. Cars swerve, shops shut early, police look the other way. The state, usually swift with their lathis, becomes strangely servile. The spectacle is sanctioned, not in spite of its chaos, but perhaps because of it. And this is precisely what I try to tell everyone who wants to complain about this chaos. That what we witness in the Kawar Yatra is, in the guise of devotional pilgrimage, a state-engineered carnival of sanctioned anarchy. It is the annual moral holiday capitalism throws for the structurally excluded. Those who sweat in warehouses, sleep in overcrowded chawls, and die anonymously in construction accidents suddenly find themselves, if only for a week, on top of the hierarchy. Not by rising, but by being allowed to spill over. The sociologist Emily Durkheim once described the function of ritual as a mechanism to renew the moral bonds of society. But what if the ritual is engineered not to renew but to divert? In India, the Kawar Yatra is less a religious act than a political analgesic, a high decibel sedative administered to the disempowered in order to keep them from noticing their disempowerment. This is not devotion, this is catharsis outsourced. This temporary sovereignty over streets is not granted in any kind of resistance to the state, but as a gift. A carefully cordoned off arena where the lumpen can scream, thrash, intimidate, and feel, if briefly, like sovereigns. The same young man who must bow before supervisors and landlords all year now watches the police part crowds for him. What looks like chaos is in fact a choreography of resentment managed by the state with precision. Let them loot a bit, scream a bit, smash a few things, just don't let them ask why their dreams come only with drum beats and never with dignity. The complaint among my chattering class, people like me, is always the same. Kawar Yatras are louder, uglier, more violent than before. This is not the Kawar Yatra of my childhood. Or I do not remember a Kawar Yatra during my childhood. That may all well be true. But so is this. Over the past 2 decades, India's workers have been slowly, meticulously stripped of their ability to organize, protest, or bargain. According to the National Labour Bureau from 2016, registered trade unions have declined by 80% since 1999. So between 1999 to 2016. India's workforce today numbers approximately 487 million people. Of these, only 8.9 million are in unions, 1.87%. And among the vast informal sector constituting 93% of Indian workers, union penetration is at 0.77%. The attrition is not organic, it has been designed. It is the slow violence of policy, narrative, and neglect. In the post liberalization era, trade unions were cast as villains in India's economic fairy tale. They were set to spook investors, stall development, and fetter the ambitions of a rising middle class. Like all convenient scapegoats, their vilification was both over determined and under examined. No credible data ever proved that unionization hindered productivity. But evidence was never the point. The point was sentiment, an atmosphere of disdain cultivated to rationalize the reforms. Governments across party lines complied. Labor laws have been quietly diluted over time. SEZs became heavens not just for tax breaks but for lawlessness. Minimum wage, maternity leave, the right to unionize all became negotiable. Contractors replaced employees. Temp jobs replaced security. And mobility turned into modern bondage. A migrant from Chhattisgarh buzzed into a Gurgaon factory doesn't just lose his home, he loses the right to even know who pays him. A woman working 12-hour shifts at a garment unit in Tirupur is less likely to form a union than to be fired for trying. Trade unionism, once the moral pulse of India's working class, is now embalmed in nostalgia and left to rot in courtrooms. Only in Kerala do they breathe with any vitality. Everywhere else they are spectres. And yet the anger has not vanished. It has simply moved. So, when Kawariyas clash with commuters, when they storm down highways with blaring speakers and unshakable impunity, we must ask, where else and when else do these men feel power? Their vandalism, condemned by TV panels and gated societies, is not random. It is choreographed catharsis. It is not a rebellion against the system, but the system's licensed explosion, a pressure valve. For 1 week, the abandoned worker is told he is a warrior. The street is his temple, the trident his contract. Middle class outrage at this disorder mourns the dented car, but not the dismantled worker. We invoke civility as if it were neutral, forgetting that public order is often a synonym for structural exclusion. The broken glass window attracts more media coverage than the fact that over 25 million workers in India live without formal contracts, insurance, or recourse. It is easier to see the riot than to see the reason. What's unfolding is not anarchy, it's an economy of grievance. Ritualized fury in saffron to compensate for the red that has been drained from the labor movement. The Kawar Yatra may look like a pilgrimage, but it functions as a theatre of displaced revolt. An angry dance of those who have been denied the right to organize and told instead to obey, to chant, to march. Durkheim saw ritual as the glue of society, but in today's India, ritual has become the substitute for justice. When unions die, carnivals take their place. The worker denied the right to assemble in protest assembles instead in procession. He does not strike, but he chants. He does not block a factory gate, but an expressway. This is not failure of labor. It is the success of capital. The system hasn't merely crushed trade unions, it has replaced them with rituals that mimic resistance, while keeping the roots of inequality intact. What we are witnessing then is not the disorder of the poor, but the order of their managed desperation. Capitalism, as Zizek once riffed, sells us the illness and the cure in the same breath. It manufactures desires by manufacturing lack. You are never rich enough, beautiful enough, free enough. There is always more to have, more to be. For the urban underclass who clean our sewage and deliver our food, this lack is not a marketing strategy but a daily reality. They do not get to participate in the consumption capitalism promises, only in its production. But desire does not vanish. Just because fulfillment is denied, it festers, it ferments. And when the state opens the gates, whether through a religious procession, a political rally, or a sudden suspension of policing, that desire bursts forth. Looting then is not an attack on capitalism, but its most honest enactment. The looter does not seek revolution, he seeks participation. He wants what he has been told to want. He does not question the billboard, he breaks into the showroom. This is why looting unsettles the bourgeoisie, not because of the disorder it represents, but because of the order it reveals. It shows us that moral codes we revere, property, civility, restraint, are upheld not by consent but by exclusion. And once exclusion becomes visible, the whole architecture of legitimacy trembles. So, we punish the looter, not because he disrupted the system, but because he performed it too perfectly. He consumed without a credit score. He violated the law, yes, but only to fulfill its most sacred command: buy, acquire, possess, have, wield power. There is in all this a perverse symmetry. The pilgrim who walks for miles to pour Ganga water on a shivling, and the looter who smashes a mall window to grab a watch or ruin a KFC that he can never afford, are not opposites. They are kin. Both act out the desires capitalism has planted in them. One cloaked in some kind of bhakti, the other in rage. Both are offered moments of transcendence, and both will be returned quietly to their cages once the spectacle ends. The question then is not whether such rituals or riots should be allowed or condemned. The question is what they tell us about a society where the only sanctioned rebellion is one that asks for nothing but noise, where the only acceptable form of protest is one that reaffirms the very desire that it enslaves. What does it say about a nation when its most vibrant street politics comes not from the organized left, but from intoxicated pilgrimages and orchestrated eruptions? What happens when rebellion becomes ritual and ritual becomes relief? So highways are cordoned off for barefoot pilgrims on modified bikes and blaring trucks, their speakers roaring not chants but Bollywood remixes of Divine Fury. Shiva was the meditative god of ascetics, has become a mascot for hyper-masculine pageantry. The state, meanwhile, watches, not with suspicion but with paternal indulgence, offering water booths and flower petals. It is hard to miss the irony. The only time the working poor are allowed to take over public space is when they are performing devotion, not dissent. This is not merely about religion, nor even about politics, but about the choreography of obedience. In a country where labor unions are vilified, protests are criminalized, and poverty is aestheticized into resilience, the Kawar Yatra offers a sanctioned outlet for agency. But it is an agency choreographed from above, a masquerade of power that never questions power itself. No slogans for fair wages or land reform, only a drumbeat of belonging dressed in myth and muscle. And yet, the Kawadiya is no fool. He knows the state that cheers his devotion would turn its lathi on him were he to strike, not chant. That the same police handling out prasad could tomorrow bulldoze his basti. He knows somewhere in his bones that his brief sovereignty comes not from rights but from ritual. Ritual that flatters the ruling order, like a carnival that mocks the king only to re-enthrone him. The yatra releases pressure without redirecting it, a rebellion of form, not of content. This is the genius of ideological control in post-colonial India. To transmute the revolutionary impulse into a devotional one, to channel surplus rage into spectacle, to let the ruled dance as long as they never ask who writes the music. Marx knew this sleight of hand, so did Ambedkar, when he warned that the Indian Republic would one day find itself worshipping its own chains, if it did not annihilate caste. And yet, the chains have grown ornate. They gleam now, with LED-lit floats and state-sponsored bhakti. They hum with the frequencies of pride and peril, muffling the deeper dirge of abandonment. In all this, what place is left for the worker? The real worker, the one who builds the city but cannot afford to live in it, who bends steel but not laws, who feeds families but never policies. When their demands go unheard and their homes go unlit, they do not shout Har Har Mahadev on television. They vanish, or worse, they are made to believe their vanishing is divine will. And yet, to me sometimes, in rare corners, when I see a Kawar Yatra and I see the destruction and I feel angry, I try to remind myself, like a verse smuggled through silence, a different voice. A poem that is perhaps long forgotten in this era of dying trade unions, often suppressed, that used to be recited in union halls and street corners. हम मेहनत कश इस दुनिया से जब अपना हिस्सा मांगेंगे.
एक बाग नहीं, एक खेत नहीं, हम सारी दुनिया मांगेंगे.
We who labor shall ask for, not for field, not for factory, but for the world. It is not a demand, it is the memory of a future once dead, now disfigured by devotions that distract. But perhaps the deeper question is not what they ask for, but why so few still listen. Perhaps it is time to also recognize that the violence is not just in the broken stores and dhabas, but in a world where joy must come in convoys and power only in borrowed costumes. Perhaps the real looting happens not when the mob breaks in, but when the system convinces the poor that breaking a window is as close to justice as they'll get.
हम मेहनत कश इस दुनिया से जब अपना हिस्सा मांगेंगे. एक बाग नहीं, एक खेत नहीं, हम सारी दुनिया मांगेंगे. एक बाग नहीं, एक खेत नहीं, हम सारी दुनिया मांगेंगे.